Hi everybody, welcome back to Between the Lines. My name's Julian, I'm an obsessive reader and used book collector, and today I'm thrilled to be reviewing Rebel's Creed by Daniel B. Greene. Before I start, I just wanted to mention and thank Daniel for sending over an advanced review copy for me to check out. I had a great time reading the book, and I just finished it last night, so I wanted to give my thoughts here. And I also just wanted to say thanks for Daniel, as his channel was the first one I found when I first got into BookTube a couple years ago, and without him, I don't think my channel would be here today. I wouldn't even know that this little part of YouTube even existed, so I wanted to show my appreciation for that. This review is also part of my goal since starting my BookTube channel of reading more indie and self-published books, and I'm hoping that by giving my thoughts on these books and spreading the word that this book is out and that it's great, that I'm hopefully doing my part in supporting indie authors. So let's get into it. So since the book has just been released, this is going to be a completely spoiler-free review. I don't want to give anything away that might take away from your experience of it. There hasn't been enough time for many of you to even read the book by the time this review comes out, so don't worry about any spoilers. However, there will probably be spoilers for Breach of Peace, so if you haven't read that yet, just be warned that I'm going to be talking about some stuff that happened in that book as it greatly influenced what I'm going to be talking about today. So Rebel's Creed is the second in the Lawful Times series and picks up after the explosive ending of Breach of Peace, and this book actually takes place in the events leading up to Breach of Peace and those following what happened at the end in the assault on the warehouse. Breach of Peace was a story I actually really liked. It was fun, it was fast-paced, I got through it I think in one sitting, and it really set up a lot of characters and a world I was interested in seeing developed in further books. In starting Breach of Peace, I knew it was going to have crime and maybe detective elements. If you're familiar with my channel, you know that detective fiction, mystery fiction is one of my favorite genres, so I was hooked from the beginning and really liked the Sherlock Holmes influence that it started with. But I was also surprised to see and kind of happy to see that it evolved from there. It started with some Sherlock Holmes-y murder mystery kind of stuff and then evolved into an explosive, action-packed, and very horror-driven story, which I was pleasantly surprised by. I didn't know the level of horror that was going to be in Breach of Peace, but I'm a fan of horror, so to see that stuff introduced and then the way it kind of became so big and so crazy by the end of the novella. The novella also did a good job of planting the seeds of talking about some ideas about imperialism and the role of police within a city, and I was curious to see how that was going to be fleshed out a bit more later in the series. There wasn't a whole lot of time for that discussion in Breach of Peace, as it was a novella and very short, so I saw that those ideas were planted there and I knew that they would be fleshed out more hopefully in the rest of the series. And like I've mentioned, Breach of Peace had a pretty crazy ending which leads into Rebel's Creed. The ending left a lot of questions raised and wondering where it was going to go from there, and set up a lot for the second story. That's typically not my favorite thing when reading a story. If you've seen my Dresden Files stuff, you know that the stories in that series that I like the least are the ones that rely too much on setting up the world around it rather than focusing on its own story. But I think Daniel did a good job in introducing the world and, telling its own tale, but also setting up the world around it. And that brings us to Rebel's Creed. So Rebel's Creed, I actually liked quite a bit, and I thought it was an improvement over the original. In just the fact that it was a novel that was longer, it had, a more deliberate and steady and more organic pace, and the story evolved and unfolded kind of at a more natural rhythm to it. Breach of Peace was very fast. If that's one of the things that I quite didn't get into with Breach of Peace, was kind of how fast it was for me. A lot happened in a very short period of time, but it was a novella, so I can't fault it too much. But I think that this story and this world fits the novel structure better. It just had more time to unfold and really get us involved in the story. And I think that the storytelling here, and even the prose as well, feels a lot more confident than in the first book. Daniel takes more chances. The structure is a little different than what you'd expect in a normal novel, with the multiple timelines taking place before Breach of Peace and then after, and also balancing multiple POVs as well. I don't think it ever got confusing for me. I thought that the way it bounced between POVs and managed having a couple different timelines actually flowed really well and was never confusing for me. I also thought having the two timelines helped me understand the world a bit more. Having gone back to before the events of Breach of Peace made me appreciate the first book a little bit more and understand what was happening in that one a bit. I think that there was a level of secrecy in the first one and not giving you too much information, so to have that here in the second book reveal more to you and then expand upon it in the timeline that takes place after Breach of Peace was really nice and makes me want to go back and read the first book now, having a bigger understanding of what was happening leading up to it and even during the events of it. And something I think that was also improved on in this book was the characters. Not to say I didn't enjoy the characters in the first book, I thought they were very interesting and I thought they played on the detective tropes very well, but I thought that Daniel did a really great job in this one, making the characters more empathetic and us understanding where they're coming from and understanding their motivations a bit more clearly. And the characters have, pretty gray morality. Nobody's necessarily a full good guy or a full bad guy. He gets really in their heads and in their psyche and makes you understand who they are as a person. And even if they've done monstrous things or, are portrayed as a villain, there's always a level of humanity to them. And even the good guys have a certain level of darkness to them. He also plays up character conflicts really well. He doesn't put two characters in a room and they just vibe with each other. There's always something going on, always some subtext that gets in the way of the characters, trying to achieve their goals, which is something I really like. And I think he does a good job of creating those inter-character conflicts and having the characters in conflict with themselves as well. And they're just mostly people I can get behind, There's some cool new characters in this one. I won't give anything away, but I think I found a new favorite character in the series that you enter the POV of in this one. And you need these empathetic characters and to get in their head. A lot of these characters are learning more about the world around them. They're kind of in the dark, sort of how we are. So to have them kind of carry you through the story and to learn more about, the bigger players and what's really going on in the world really helps us get invested in it. And there's also more of that commentary on the role of police, imperialism, and a lot about working within a system that you're trying to change and the bureaucracy within. And like I hoped in Breach of Peace, that has been more fleshed out here and actually plays a role in the story. It's not just lip service. I think that a lot of these themes play a stronger role in the actual unfolding of the story rather than just being ideas. Something I also wanted to commend Daniel on is the way he writes action. This was also present in Breach of Peace, but in here I think he's gotten to a new level of writing very exciting and engaging action. It's visceral, it's intense, but it doesn't get too bogged down in details where you start getting bored. I'm very quick to get bored when reading action scenes in books, and that's happened, in super popular blockbuster books that I've read in fantasy, but that didn't happen here. It was very quick and dirty, and there was a lot more horror involved than I thought. And I'll admit, sometimes the violence and gore in the action scenes here could be a lot. I wasn't necessarily bothered by it. I'm a horror fan. I'm used to that stuff, but it could be too much for some people, so I just wanted to mention that. And in speaking about the genre blending in these books, one of the things I thought would happen is, since the first book started out with the mystery detective stuff and evolved into more action horror oriented stuff, that in Rebels Creed it would kind of expand on it from there. But I'm happy to say that it still holds on to a lot of that crime and detective element. Not to say that it doesn't achieve that same exciting crazy level that the first book did, but I'm happy that Daniel was able to still ground the book in the world he set up in the first one and expand on it and make it a little bit more rich and deep here. And in reading through this book and gaining a bigger understanding of the world at hand and what's going on and who more of the key players are, we have a greater understanding of what's happening. And it certainly, for me at least, upped the dramatic stakes because we are aware more of what was going on. Being in the dark and mystery storytelling has an allure to it where you're trying to figure out what's going on, but I think it really served the story well here for us to get that bigger picture and understand what was happening. And that goes for just, the world building and the storytelling, but also for the characters too. There are characters in this story who are very in the dark, and to see them interacting with characters who maybe have understood and what happened in Breach of Peace was very tense and very dramatic, and it really upped the stakes for me in this one. So like any book, there are certain things that I really enjoyed and loved about it, but there was also certain things that maybe I thought could have been a bit more polished or that I'd like to see a little bit better developed in the next book. So I just wanted to mention a couple of those things here. It's just my due diligence as a reviewer to give an honest review of the book. There are certain things that didn't work for me here and just wanted to mention them. So like I said earlier, we learn a lot about the world at hand here, but I still feel like we need a bit more understanding of the bigger picture. There's still a lot of telling what's bad and what's going on out there, and not a lot of showing. I want to see why the Empire is such a bad state. We get a lot more of that in this book, but I still think in order to get behind a lot of the characters, I would like to see more of why people need to fight the Empire. I was also curious to learn a bit more about what's going on with the magic and the more, I guess, supernatural elements of what's happening here and how that blends in with the world. When I was reading Breach of Peace, I was a little taken by surprise when the monster showed up in the earlier scene when they were in the wine cellar. And still to this point, I don't really know, or I'm not super confident in telling you how much the magic and those elements blend in with everyday society. It feels like there's a very, mundane aspect to the people's lives here and a very magical aspect as well, but I'm not really sure how those two kind of mingle. There was also one specific scene that didn't really work for me in this. It's not giving anything away to talk about it like this. So essentially there was a conversation scene where two characters are talking and it's very tense while at the same time playing a game. And Daniel tried to do something unique with the way the game was written and how it mixed in with the dialogue and going back and forth between the moves of the game and the tense conversation. It made it a little hard for me to keep track of and hard to visualize as well. So in that scene, I was just kind of glancing over the game moves and just kind of going to the dialogue. I appreciate what he was doing there, trying something new and a bit different, but it just personally didn't work for me. And also, like the first book, I felt like this book was also part of a gigantic setup for the next one, which I guess, he's telling a complete story in this series here, and for him to, set up the next book isn't too harmful for it. It's just a personal kind of taste thing of mine that I like books to focus more on their own storytelling rather than just setting up the next one. I also thought for the most part that the dialogue and prose was great, but there were some spots here where it was still a little clunky and awkward, but considering how that stuff already improved from book 1 to book 2, I have no doubt that by book 3 it's going to be even more crisp and polished. So that's it. That's my review for Rebel's Creed by Daniel B. Greene. I really appreciated him sending over the copy and I had a lot of fun reading it. So let me know in the comments if you're going to pick this one up. I typically would ask what you thought of the story, but since this is probably coming out on release day, I don't think many of you have had time to actually go through the story. So let me know if you're deciding whether or not to grab this one and whether or not you've read Breach of Peace and if you enjoyed it or had a more mixed reaction to it. So remember to do all the YouTube stuff like liking, subscribing, leaving a comment. Thank you for watching. Please remember to support your local library and I'll see you next time.